Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another online session. So tonight we will focus on a very exciting and interesting topic. It is related to dyslexia, and we want to focus on this topic because of so many reasons. First of all, to help dispel this myths about dyslexia and talk about it openly. And I know that dyslexia and dyslexic students are associated with some sort of stigma, educational stigma, legal stigma, and we want to talk about all this tonight with DB from the United States. DB is the perfect speaker for this topic because she knows a lot about this topic. And I will let her introduce herself to the audience, and then we will share the presentation and talk about so many things, not only dyslexia, because dyslexia is related to reading, related to the brain, related to so many topics. So as I said, the purpose is to raise awareness for dyslexia and to show people that it is not related to low intelligence, it's not a disability, it's something else. Okay, good evening, Divi. Welcome to Everyone Academy.
Good evening. I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to start with my presentation, and I'll tell you a little bit more about myself as we go through it.
Yes, sure.
But I am an Alayla Bundles community scholar at Columbia University. But I'm also on the board of directors of many organizations, and I'm really looking for not just equality, but equity, social justice, liberty, and freedom for students. Because if you don't learn to read, you don't have any of that. And I'm not just here because my son struggled with dyslexia, but because nationally in the United States, 2/3 of 8th graders do not read at 8th grade level. Our school chancellor last year said literacy is a social justice issue and should lead the equity agenda. And the New York City school system of 1 million kids is starting to turn around. Internationally, English is the language for both trade and tourism, and also for international relations. English is important around the world. And while our K-12 schools here in the United States need a lot of improvement, our higher ed programs, our universities still lead the world, and we get people from everywhere coming to our US universities. They need to be able to read and write in English. So I found out in my work in trying to understand this literacy crisis we have here in the United States that many states do not require kindergarten to 3rd grade teachers to be licensed by their ability to teach reading. Yet parents drop their kids off at school thinking that they're going to learn to read. One of the problems is many publishers offer reading programs based on how adults read or how good readers read, rather than on how kids learn to read. I'm going to be using a lot of metaphors, and maybe you all can help me with my metaphors because they are very American metaphors. The first one's about baseball. Our reading instruction is like skipping t-ball and coach pitched Little League and going right to kid pitched. We scaffold our baseball program so kids can be successful all the way through. We don't scaffold our reading instruction well enough. So here's an agenda for today. I had to make a lot of choices because there's so much to talk about. I'm going to take questions at the end about anything I didn't talk about, and I'll let you know if I know the answer. I never pretend to know the answers. This is also not a review of scripted literacy programs or specific resources, but I'm going to highlight the hallmarks of evidence-based literacy programs and compare that to what's happening in too many schools in the United States and around the world. The presentation is aimed at creating advocates for better literacy instruction and help lead you to find out more. And I'm hoping you're going to find it helpful. So I always start by talking about neurodiversity. We honor neurodiversity when we celebrate a chess champion. When we see someone solve a Rubik's Cube quickly, we're amazed. And we know others who learn to play chess and play decently or can memorize the patterns for a Rubik's Cube. And we all know people that struggle with games like this, even checkers. Now, if I had functional MRI brain scans, known as fMRI, taken when people were engaged in these activities, you would see different parts of their brains active depending on whether they were talented at these or not. And as they gained talent at these games, you would see different parts of their brains light up, just like someone who's already talented. We punish neurodiversity when we exclude struggling readers and dyslexic kids from good instruction in school. Reading acquisition is really on a continuum, goes across. And studies show that your predisposition for literacy acquisition is hereditary. If one parent is dyslexic, you have more than a 65% chance of being dyslexic. Now, some people read easily. Over here in the dark green, it's as though an experienced Formula One driver was driving the symbols quickly through their brain to be processed into words with meaning. Many others in the next set of green have Teslas driving pretty smoothly. Drivers are still working and the cars need to be charged up. Others in the lightest green, this light green and this, are kind of driving old clunking cars in a parking lot, popping a clutch, stalling out, and misshifting. It takes a lot of direct instruction and practice to drive smoothly. You can't shift from first to fourth gear. Now, all kids would learn to read with good instruction, and you would never want an F1 driver driving fast all the time. In my son's class, I saw the kids over here on my left who could read rather easily. And I saw these many kids who gained with the broad instruction the school had. But I saw a lot of kids, like my son, struggling. And like these 4 kids over here who were struggling, not learning at all. They were dyslexic. So what is broad instruction? It can be anything that is watered down, invented by teachers, to good programs delivered poorly, to programs that are really antithetical. And in the United States, we have something called Fonemes and Pinnell, and Teachers College Reading and Writing Program. It can even be well-designed programs delivered poorly. Also, you're going to hear different prevalence statistics about dyslexia. Some scientists say it represents 5 to 12% of the population. Others say 10 to 15%. Others say 1 in 5 or 20%. The people agree that it represents in the United States, because our language is so difficult, 80% of all learning disabilities. But because of generations of poor instruction learning to read, we're going to see how this is hereditary, educational, and it is also social. So there's a quick history of the English language, and you're going to see how it aligns with the quick history of England. We started out around the turn of the millennium after Christ with Old English, which was a very Germanic language. But the Romans came through, and they dropped some Latin language into the Old English. The Vikings came through, and they dropped some Danish type of language into the English. The Normans or the French came through, and they dropped French words into English. We ended up with something called Middle English. But transportation got better. There were paths for horses and other things. And the Irish and the Scottish and the Welsh and the Celtic and everyone started walking around that island and dropping different words into English. We got modern English. Sounds a lot like we have today. But the scribes were kind of all over English, and it took them a long time to contact each other. And they all started spelling words differently. They also had arguments about how to spell words. because one lived in a town that had a lot more Latin influence, and another lived in a town that had a lot more Danish influence. So words got spelled differently. And then we got the printing press. That's how they really codified how to spell things. But they used information from the scribes to do this. Finally, we have what's called the great vowel shift. And that's because words like good, food, and blood used to rhyme. And vowels are based on where your tongue is in your mouth. They're very open sounds, and your tongue makes the different sounds depending on where it is in your mouth. Now, if the words before and after a word were very common, that your tongue would move around your mouth a little bit, and the words would come out sounding differently. So there was a great vowel shift, but our vowels are constantly shifting as new words come into our language, or different words get used more often. So a little bit about the English code and why it's so complicated. You probably know we have 26 letters, but we have 44 phonemes, and we have 250 or so graphemes. 44 to 250 is our ratio for English. We're not even worried about the 26 letters. Arabic is nearly 1-to-1 because you use diacritics. I'm going to take a minute now and let you listen to our 44 phonemes. And you're going to have to forgive me while I pull it up. All right.
So diacritics are some sort of sound?
Diacritics are notes, are dots or so. I'm wondering why she's not sounding right. Oh, because she's going to sound into my.
To produce only the phoneme itself without any additional sound.
Can you hear her now?
An example
Yes.
is the sound. Sometimes when teachers are trying to emphasize or isolate a phoneme, they say "huh." Instead, focus on producing just the phoneme itself. We'll start with the consonant phoneme. You'll see the associated letter or letter combination, also known as a grapheme, on the screen as I say the sound. Ready? Here we go. As in banana. As in dinosaur. As in fish. As in guitar. As in hand. As in jelly. As in card. Ooh, as in leaf. As in Monday. As in nail. As in the end of the word, sing. As in pumpkin. As in rain. As in sun. As in the middle of treasure. As in turtle. As in volcano. As in watch. As in yo-yo. As in zip. Some graphemes, such as Q and X, are composed of two phonemes. For example, Q makes the sound, and X makes the sound. The next phonemes are considered to be digraphs, where two letters make one sound, as in child, as in shoes, as in the middle of mother, as in third. Make sure students hear you pronounce phonemes correctly. You're modeling the language that they need to independently decode and write words. Just like the consonants, the English language has a wide variety of vowel phonemes with their own distinct sounds. I'll model each sound, and the grapheme will be shown on the screen below. A, as in the first sound in apple. E, as in the first sound in elephant. I, as in the first sound in igloo. As in the first sound in octopus. As in the first sound in umbrella. A, as in the middle sound in rain. As in the final sound in saw. E, as in the final sound in tree. I, as in the middle sound in light. O, as in the middle sound in oat. U, as in the first sound in uniform. Oo, as in the middle sound in mood. As in the middle sound in book. Ow, as in the final sound in cow. Oi, as in the final sound in boy. There are also R-controlled vowels, such as R, as in the final sound in car. As in the middle sound in heard, bird, and serve. Air, as in the final sound in chair. Ear, as in the final sound in spear. Or, as in the middle sound in fork. Sometimes, when a vowel sound is located in the unstressed syllable of a word, it becomes a schwa. An example of this is the that you hear as in the first sound of the word again. Make sure that your students hear you model the correct consonant and vowel phonemes. This will help them produce the correct sounds themselves, and in turn, guide them as they learn to read and write.
All right, I'm going to continue on my presentation, right? I think it's important to understand our 44 phonemes, and Yvette does a fabulous job on YouTube. So we just left off here. And 26 letters. I'm getting some feedback here. With our 44 phonemes and 250 graphemes. Arabic is nearly a one-to-one, but you have the diacritics, which are the different little symbols on top of your letters or to the side of your letters that help you pronounce them, know that they're pronounced differently. Oh, I see what happened. So this is a chart of all of our phonemes, so you can see it visually rather than hear it like we did in our last presentation. So, and you can have a copy of this chart later on. It's available online as well. So we have some building blocks of literacy to show you as well. Word awareness is what kids mostly have when they start out. They figure out there's words. Some kids even have some syllable awareness. But really, school needs to address their phonemic awareness to continue building on their word awareness and syllable awareness. Sensitivity to rhyme and matching by alliteration and being able to segment the phonemes in a word. all will lead to phonemic awareness, understanding all the letters, all the sounds in a word. That builds phonological awareness and then phonological processing. But the building blocks are really important. Just because someone seems to know their words and know syllables, they're not ready to read. And then there's some things, and we'll talk about this later, that make learning to read even harder. Verbal short-term memory, rapid serial naming, and articulation speed. So this infographic is important. It's known as Scarborough's reading rope. It explains how we learn to read well, and I'll refer to it and the components of it in a different slide. Science tells us that we need word recognition, which begins with the phonemes and the syllables to build phonological awareness or word recognition. So I want everyone to count how many syllables there are in the word silence. We hear silence. But how many phonemes are in the word silence? Could you hear 6 phonemes? I, silence. So phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition, or connecting sounds to symbols, are what make up the word recognition. And then we also have language comprehension. Language comprehension is incredibly important. The background knowledge, the vocabulary, language structures like metaphors, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. All these are important, but you need both of those to weave into a rope. If one strand is weak, the rope will get weak. Become skilled reading, but even then you're not finished. Fluent execution is also important to become a good reader. Fluency, and you have to practice fluency, is really important. We also call this the simple view of reading. Decoding times language comprehension equals reading. So we promised we'd tell you a little bit about dyslexia. But you had to understand that bit about reading to understand dyslexia more. It's decoding symbols and groups of symbols. It's neurobiological in origin. That's why I had the slides about neurodiversity at the beginning. It has nothing to do with vision. It has nothing to do with intelligence. It is really characterized by accurate and fluent word recognition and poor spelling and decoding abilities. This is very obvious in English. And it's a deficit in the phonological component in English that is often unexpected in relationship to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. With our issues about race here in the United States, there are some problems with this definition because our Black and brown children often are victims of low expectations and their reading struggles are not unexpected. We also have problems because we don't always have effective classroom instruction. And of course, not learning how to read brings on secondary consequences in reading comprehension and a reduced reading experience. And so then you learn less vocabulary and you develop less background knowledge. So we talked before about it representing about 80% of all learning disabilities. I'm going to call it kind of in the middle of all the experts, about 1 in 6 kids. But if you compare that to the 1 in 60 on the autism spectrum, and in the United States, the autistic community has a big, powerful voice, but our dyslexic community does not. So Margaret Bird Rawson is known as the Great Dane of dyslexia. She was an education researcher, a sociologist, a psychologist, and she really put it down really succinctly here. We'll talk more about how this plays out. So as I said before, dyslexia can be even more complicated. We call it double deficit dyslexia. It's harder for these kids to learn to read, but with intense instruction, they can. We come up with some other things like mnemonic devices to help them learn. With good instruction and a combination, double deficit dyslexic kids can become active citizens. We have things that are comorbid with dyslexia. Dysgraphia, or trouble with writing and organizing thoughts on paper, is addressed with dyslexia with good instruction, direct instruction. Dyscalculia, trouble with numbers and math, is addressed with direct instruction and multimodal and multisensory practice in math. Executive function issues can often be helped with good planning and organizational systems taught with direct instruction. These other conditions can be accommodated in schools and with doctors' help. But we have a Matthew effect. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. If you're not taught to read and you don't like to read, you learn less, you read less. When you are not a good reader, you disconnect from school and drop out. And then who is your community? We've already discussed that dyslexia and learning to read is hereditary. So I promised to share the hallmarks of good literacy instruction. Anita Archer, who you can find on YouTube, is an expert in explicit instruction. She explains it as I do, we do, you do, or I do, we do, we do, we do, you do, practice, practice, practice. And we explicitly teach reading and spelling together, decoding and encoding. Good instruction is diagnostic. What are the students not understanding, and what are the teachers not teaching? It is systematic, like math, addition before multiplication. You do the same with reading. You put a scope and a sequence together to teach the phonics. It's based on synthetic phonics, how sounds are built. Analytic phonics are about taking words apart, or morphology. We'll talk about that more soon. And you teach with fidelity. You don't teach what interests the kids. Examples within fidelity should, of course, interest kids. And you teach to mastery. You may need to circle back and remaster something, but you don't skip ahead. With music or sports, you don't skip ahead until you master the skills you need. If you don't know a chord, you cannot play a song that requires that chord. In physical education, you don't throw small, heavy, hard balls with kids in early physical education. You start with something like scarves and then rolling big balls, throwing medium, softer balls, and then tennis and baseballs. You scaffold instruction and you work on mastery, or someone gets frustrated or hurt. And with dyslexia or other reading difficulties, you don't do this remediation once or twice a week. It can't be shortchanged, especially if a student is far behind, and especially with contrary instruction in ELA class, which I'll discuss shortly. You'll see how all this kind of echoes the reading rope that we looked at. There are 5 pillars. No one is a phonics-only advocate. Phonics are necessary, but not sufficient. Finally, I can't emphasize enough how important background knowledge is. It really helps with vocabulary comprehension. Teaching sounds before letters helps with your phonemic and phonological awareness. Decodable texts and passages help practice the synthetic phonics codes. Multimodal practice and cursive help kids master these codes. So this, I'm pulling up the slide. When you have a grounding in the sounds of phonemes and of academic English and a strong vocabulary and background knowledge from read-alouds and conversations and experiments and field trips done well, will help move these kids from the lighter green over to this darker green. There's always going to be some profoundly dyslexic kids that need more speech therapy, small group, or one-on-one instruction. But if we teach reading well, starting with phonemic awareness, the dyslexic kids will be apparent and not get mixed in with our poor instruction. So what happens in a lot of schools and what happens when you have haphazard or unbalanced literacy? And how does that differ from structured literacy? So a lot of people expect you to arrive at school with phonemic awareness and phonological awareness. Structured literacy includes that. A lot of the unbalanced literacy programs have kind of a phonics light or incidental approach to phonics, rather than teaching phonics systematically. A lot of these early literacy programs have students guess based on the meaning or the semantics or the visual cues in pictures versus decoding by phonics. A lot of schools still use leveled readers and predictable books. Predictable books should be gone after pre-K. All they do is teach kids that letters make words, words make sentences, sentences build paragraphs, and paragraphs turn into books. But they're so predictable in nature, people pretend to read them. They don't actually decode. Leveled readers don't focus on decoding at all. Decodable books are great to practice the codes that you've been taught, but authentic read alouds for language comprehension is even more important. The assessment systems are even different. A lot of balanced literacy programs have teachers count the errors someone makes, and if you make very few, you could go on to the next level of leveled readers. Whereas in structured literacy, we categorize the errors and work on them so you don't make any. We go back to that word mastery. Make sure someone has mastered all the types of syllables that the word needs so they can work on learning, building a fund of codes and creating a word bank. The mini lesson is a hallmark of unbalanced literacy, and that's not bad in itself, but it doesn't replace explicit instruction and a lot of practice. Even sight words are defined differently. Are they the high frequency words that you ought to memorize because they're so high frequency? Or are they the words that follow no code and you have to memorize them? Or are they the words that you've practiced so often that you've committed them to memorize, to memory? So I hope you all have a pen and a paper because I'm going to ask you to do an exercise. Many dyslexia presentations use complicated nonsense words. Today, I'm going to use an example from regular English. Please write these words down in a list. Cough, like when you have a cold. Rough, like sandpaper. Through, like you go through a tunnel. Though, like however or nevertheless. Plow, like you plow a field or plow snow. Please say them out loud a few times. Do they rhyme? Do they look like they should rhyme? Now, please switch your pen or pencil to your non-dominant hand. If you're left-handed, switch it to your right hand. If you're right-handed, switch it to your left hand. And write the word bologna, like the sandwich meat. And pony, like a small horse. Do they look like they should rhyme? Now, continuing with the non-dominant hand, write two more words. Consequences and paradoxes. So what was different about your unnatural hand? Did you think about how each letter, what order the letters are in, and how to form each letter? All right. Put your pen back in your other hand, your good dominant hand. We're going to write another list. I'm going to start with aid, like help. Sunday, something made out of ice cream. Pray, what an eagle hunts or a coyote hunts. Break, what happens if you drop the tray? 8, the number after 7 and before 9. Tray, something you carry food on. Table, where you might set the tray down. Cake, that might be on the tray. And gauge, how you measure something. Now, what do these words have in common? All right, 5 more words in a list, and then we'll talk about what there is in common. Aid, like lemonade or limeade. Sunday, the day of the week. Pray, what some people do at church or synagogue or mosque. Break, what a car needs to stop or a bike needs to stop. And 8, what we did to the cake and the sundae. So have you ever thought about how many different ways we have in the English language to spell the sound long A? Have you thought about the homophones we have? All right, one more quick list. Please use lowercase letters and write these in a list. B, D, P, and Q. Now, are these the same symbols, but they are flipped around and turned upside down? Now, you can flip a chair around and it's still a chair. You can turn it upside down and still recognize the chair. But these 4 letters are the same symbol flipped around and upside down, and they all sound different. This is a lot for pre-K, first kindergarten, second grade, first grade. So when you're a young child learning to recognize the letters and their sounds, you might remember that the letter is a ball and stick letter. They might not remember which one. People say dyslexic kids reverse things, but these are almost all 3-letter words that people are looking at, and they usually have B and D in them. Because people are guessing which letter is in the word. So it is guessing, not reversing. And usually it's a pretty close guess. So how do we teach all these forms of long A? You might learn the common ways first, such as vowel, consonant, E. Like the word cake, or break like car brakes, or aid like lemonade. And then you might learn that the vowel team, AI, comes at the beginning or middle of a word, such as aid or sail. And you might learn that the vowel team, AY, says long A at the end of the word, like tray or pray. But you might not learn like the number 8 until you're learning the words freight and weight and other words that use that same system. All right, I'd like you all to start reading this poem and reading it out loud. It's written by a Dutch writer, traveler and teacher named Gerard Knowles Ternet. He lived at the end of the 1800s till the mid-1900s. And it includes, if I gave you the whole thing, about 800 examples of irregular spelling. It shows how difficult the English language is. But I'm going to show you later that about 90% of our words are decodable. You can decode our words based on a synthetic phonics or morphological system. It's pretty impressive when you see all these words that are not decodable. Aziz, do you want to take a paragraph and read it out loud?
Okay. I will just read. So Dearest creature in creation, study English pronunciation. I will teach you in my verse. Sounds like corpse, horse, and worse. I will keep you, Susie, busy. Make you your head with heat grow dizzy. Tear in eye, your dress you will tar. Queer, fear, seer, hear my prayer. Pray, console your loving poet. Make my coat look new, dear, suet. Just compare heart, hear, and heard, dies and diet, lord and word, sword and sword, retain and written, mind the letter how it is written. So far, so good?
So far, so good. I heard a couple of little mistakes because it's really hard. I'm going to show you all a couple more pages of it. Banquet is not nearly parquet, which exactly rhymes with, does it? Parquet with khaki? Not in my English. Discount, viscount, load and broad, toward or forward, to reward. It's very, very hard to get all these words right. And we have dialects, so they don't even sound like how he thought they sounded. Camel, constable, unstable, principal, disciple, label, petal, penal, and canal, wait, surmise, plate, promise, pal. It's just a complicated language.
The second one is very complicated.
It really is. So I'm going to give you just a quick intro to our synthetic codes. We have closed syllables. They end with a consonant and it forces a short vowel. We have open syllables that end with a long vowel that forces the long vowel. We have our syllables that end in silent E, like cute or cake, forces a long vowel. We have vowel teams that have one sound. We have R-controlled vowels. You heard a little bit about that also in the YouTube that I showed you. And we have consonant LE, like gentle or able. These all force the words to do something that you can actually apply. We teach these in a scope and sequence. Two scopes or two sequences. One is clover. That would be closed, constant LE, open, vowel team, silent E, and R controlled. Revlock is another sequence. Doesn't really matter the sequence, but you have to have fidelity to a sequence so you can continue to build on it. CVC, you'll see a lot. That is consonant, vowel, consonant, closed syllables. Vowel, consonant, consonant, vowel, like the word rabbit has two closed syllables. Reptile, you see that you divide the syllable between the P and the T, that consonant, consonant. One is closed and one is one of those magic E's. Candy and hornet. Hornet has one of the R-controlled syllables and a closed syllable. So we can come up with a code for almost every word. The vowel, consonant, vowel, like tiger, the first vowel is stressed. It's an open vowel. It's a long vowel. Camel, same thing. The first vowel, although that's a little irregular because it's not a camel, it's a camel. But the second vowel works. Same with motel and Japan. This is a website where you might start learning more about this. We also have morphology or analytic phonics. And this is really important to learn too. But it still depends on our synthetic phonics because the root word here is rupt. And you have to know how to pronounce rupt and what it means before you can learn anything about all the morphological changes. So why is it so complicated, and why is not everyone learning to read? Well, I'll give you a history of reading words in the United States. When the kids learned at home, we had something called the Blueback spellers or the McGuffey spellers, and they used phonics. As school began, we had something called the Beacon readers, and they used phonics. But for some scientists, they weren't really scientists, they were theorists, started studying how adults learn to read. One of them even put suction cups with sticks onto adults' eyes and looked at how they were reading words and how their eyes adjusted. And they used some psycholinguist theory and came up with the whole word theory of education. John Dewey and his democratic theory of education, making sure children were centered around this, kind of fit right into that. And we had systems like Dick and Jane. Memorization of repeated words and semantics was enough to learn to read. Repetition and predictability of whole words would build a bank of words a student could rely on. But phonics advocates kind of rebelled, and more scientific research began. A neuroscientist explored the brains of good readers and dyslexic people or poor readers at the time, and noticed which parts of the brains were used a lot and which parts were not. His colleague, 𝐏𝐚𝐫𝐞𝐬, started providing much of the research and created rules for the synthetic phonics codes to teach decoding words into sounds and symbols, along with spelling and encoding. They understood the importance of semantics and language work as well. A woman named Diana Hanbury implemented this at a famous school named Sidwell Friends in Washington, D.C., and she worked with all the struggling readers. In short time, these kids were reading and writing better than their friends who were being taught with whole word. Clearly, we need phonics and semantics, word work and sentence work. The psycholinguists and the theorists came back and adjusted with whole language, memorizing words and using cues from pictures and other words to build a bank in your head. Phonics advocates came back, and California congressmen called for a national reading panel of experts to examine best practices in reading instruction. The panel reviewed 100,000 studies and published a comprehensive report. This is evidence, data, science. And they again recommended phonics and semantics and language work, but they weren't clear enough and it wasn't implemented well. And we ended up with balanced literacy. It's whole language in sheep's clothing and independent phonics programs that don't work well in isolation. Still, people that can afford tutoring or specialized schools benefit from the type of reading based on Orton and Gillingham's work that has been proven several times over with functional MRI. And we can highlight the neurobiology and neurodiversity in acquiring reading skills. Currently, in the United States, much of our reading instruction does not align with our service-based economy. So whether you believe in vaccines or math or science of reading, structured literacy, it's just a fight between people that believe in evidence and science and people that don't. Reading is the same way. I'm fighting that reading because I want all kids to be able to read. And now I am happy to start taking questions.
That's great, really a great presentation. You mentioned so many things, so many ideas. So before we move to comments made by people, I just want to react to some of what you presented. So you mentioned that 90% of the language are decodable.
Yes.
You are talking about the English language.
Yes.
So why do you think this problem of dyslexia persists, or this problem of
Well,
lack in there is no interest in reading?
yes, I'm looking for your Facebook page now. If you could put it in the chat, that'd be great, and I'll log on to the Facebook page. But
Yes.
so you are dyslexic in any language, and whether it is a logographic language like Chinese, or a decodable language like Arabic or Spanish or Finnish, or in a really complicated language like English. And so, but you can learn to read any of them, and it just may take longer and better, more intensive instruction. It's the non-decodable words that'll have, or the words that don't follow a code, that have to be memorized, but everyone has to start memorizing them.
So you also mentioned that English is a complicated language.
Yes.
Is it in terms of the syllables, the phonics, and pronunciation?
Yeah, it's that proportion from phonemes to graphemes. If it was a 1-to-1, it's considered a transparent language.
Okay. There is an interesting example, or I think I read this somewhere. Maybe it's in the Great Gatsby, or I don't remember exactly where I read this expression you mentioned. The rich gets richer and the poor gets children. What's again how this is related?
That is
to
reading. So the Matthew effect: the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Those that can read more and learn more. Those that can't read less and learn less. And so it goes further away from each other.
So the more we read, the more we get better. The more we don't read and disconnect from the school, as you said.
Yeah, so you often disconnect because you can't do your homework.
Yes.
And then you get low grades. You disconnect from school.
So there is a comment here from Hassan. He said that he has this problem in sound. Maybe he means pronunciation. He has this problem of dyslexia, but in terms of the sound, he doesn't know how to pronounce sounds correctly.
Yeah, so in English, you have to get those 44 sounds down. And they might overlap with a lot of Arabic sounds, but you really have to get those 44 sounds down.
Yes, is there a training for the muscles or to get those sounds?
Yeah, it's the shape of your mouth and where you have your tongue and your lips is how you make the sounds. But it's also how you hear the sounds. You have to actually kind of practice hearing them. Like the sound ooh in shoe and boot. And then later you'll learn how to spell them. But you have to hear them to be able to divide the syllables.
Yes, I all the time hear American English and I watch a lot of movies, but my accent is not that perfect. That's a problem. So hearing and practicing, I think.
Yeah, it's listening, listening and saying those 44 sounds is the first stop on being able to teach English and learn English.
So Dibi, can you go back to the reading rope? It's really
Yes.
interesting. There are so many areas there that we would like to you quickly talk about.
Yes, I can. Actually, I'm going to do it quicker. Maybe I'm not doing it quicker.
Okay, If you,
I'm almost there. I'm sorry.
no problem.
All
Just take your time.
right. Okay. All right. There you go.
Wow, that's great.
And then,
So I understand that I will talk about the left side. So the
Yes.
details. So this looks like cells of the brain. So in order to achieve the skilled reading, there is a process. There are strands.
right.
So you started with language comprehension, and there is word recognition. And I see
Yes.
that you start you emphasized the importance of background knowledge.
Yes.
That's why teachers should focus more on the pre-teaching stage, right?
Yes. The background knowledge, you can be reading books aloud and children will gain background knowledge. When you go on field trips, you can do puppet shows, all sorts of things will build background knowledge and build vocabulary. There's lots of ways to do it.
Or pre-teaching vocabulary, as you have mentioned.
Yes.
So the idea of phonological awareness in word recognition, you associated this with what you call phonological processing.
Yes.
So there is phonological processing, and there is what you call phonemic awareness.
Yes.
So what does it mean phonological processing in terms of the building blocks?
So these are the bottom are the building blocks of phonemic awareness. Some kids don't hear the rhymes because they don't know their sounds, and they cannot hear the rhymes, and they can't build those divisions of sounds when they can't hear the rhymes.
Okay.
Alliteration is about the beginning of a word, to make sure that the sounds the same at the beginning, like book and build both have the b sound at the beginning. And then to segment the words, like the word cat has 3 sounds. And you might manipulate that into bat, or manipulate it by dropping a sound off and just saying. So that's all manipulation of sounds. 2-year-olds have about 12 or 13 sounds. By the time you get to 3 years old, your regular child development, your mouth can make about 20 sounds. And by the time you're 4 years old, you should be able to do all 44 sounds. And so that builds phonemic awareness, that you're really aware that there's 44 different sounds by the time you get to school. And phonological awareness, that's more about the written code that these phonics are on. And then you can actually process these codes into words. Does that help a bit?
Yes. So I want to I have a little comment on dyslexia and how you said that connecting sounds to symbols or decoding symbols.
Yes.
Do you think that this problem or this issue is more related to how the brain works rather than something else? And in this context, do you think that more research we need to know as educators and teachers and as parents? We need to know more about brain research or research on the brain, how the brain is learning the language, how the brain is processing, how the brain is dealing with mistakes, etc. Do you think that we need this area?
Yeah, so it is definitely in your brain. It is a, and I could show some videos of the brain if someone wanted, or I could put it into the Facebook chat. There's some good explanations of it, but yes, it is the pathways in your brain, and it takes longer to create the fast pathways from the front of the brain to the back of the brain where you make sense of the words. And yes, parents and teachers need more knowledge of this, because often kids are not considered bright if they can't read. They may be just as bright, but because they are dyslexic, because their brains don't work exactly the same way, that brightness doesn't shine through. We hear that Albert Einstein was dyslexic. John Lennon, we hear, was dyslexic.
Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise, yeah. There are a lot, Whoopi Goldberg. I mean, there are a lot of dyslexic people, and a lot of them have figured out how to live just fine. But because of the low expectations that we have among Black and brown kids here in the United States, a lot of them never learn to read and end up in prison.
Yes.
They don't have access to college and careers.
I am saying this because we found this problem, for example, in grammar instruction. You know that teachers keep teaching the same structures over and over again, and students keep making the same mistakes over and over again. It's like an endless process. So it is happening inside. Maybe there is a moment when the brain intervenes and it's like an internalization process. I don't know about this, but it has to begin from inside the brain. That's why I asked this question.
Yeah, I'm going to bring something up for you. Hopefully we can play it correctly. Okay.
Is it like a video?
It's going to be a video.
Okay.
That's good. I did the wrong. Go. Let's see if it'll. Oh. It's not letting me play this one. There we go. You can hear it?
Take a moment to read the following. How was that? Frustrating? Slow? What were those sentences about? They're actually a simulation of the experience of dyslexia, designed to make you decode each word. Those with dyslexia experience that laborious pace every time they read. When most people think of dyslexia, they think of seeing letters and words backwards, like seeing B as D and vice versa. Or they might think people with dyslexia see saw as was. The truth is, people with dyslexia see things the same way as everyone else. Dyslexia is caused by a phonological processing problem, meaning people affected by it have trouble not with seeing language, but with manipulating it. For example, if you heard the word cat and then someone asked you remove the C, what word would you have left? At. This can be difficult for those with dyslexia. Given a word in isolation like fantastic, students with dyslexia need to break the word into parts to read it. Fantastic. Time spent decoding makes it hard to keep up with peers and gain sufficient comprehension. Spelling words phonetically like S-T-I-K for stick and F-R-E-N-S for friends is also common. These difficulties are more widespread and varied than commonly imagined. Dyslexia affects up to 1 in 5 people. It occurs on a continuum. One person might have mild dyslexia, while the next person has a profound case of it. Dyslexia also runs in families. It's common to see one family member who has trouble spelling, while another family member has severe difficulty decoding even one-syllable words like catch. The continuum and distribution of dyslexia suggest a broader principle to bear in mind as we look at how the brains of those with dyslexia process language. Neurodiversity is the idea that because all our brains show differences in structure and function, we shouldn't be so quick to label every deviation from the norm as a pathological disorder, or dismiss people living with these variations as defective. People with neurobiological variations like dyslexia, including such creative and inventive individuals as Picasso, Muhammad Ali, Whoopi Goldberg, Steven Spielberg, and Cher, clearly have every capacity to be brilliant and successful in life. So here's the special way the brains of those with dyslexia work. The brain is divided into two hemispheres. The left hemisphere is generally in charge of language and ultimately reading, while the right typically handles spatial activities. fMRI studies have found that the brains of those with dyslexia rely more on the right hemisphere and frontal lobe than the brains of those without it. This means when they read a word, it takes a longer trip through their brain and can get delayed in the frontal lobe. Because of this neurobiological glitch, they read with more difficulty. But those with dyslexia can physically change their brain and improve their reading. With an intensive multisensory intervention that breaks the language down and teaches the reader to decode based on syllable types and spelling rules, the brains of those with dyslexia begin using the left hemisphere more efficiently while reading, and their reading improves. The intervention works because it locates dyslexia appropriately as a functional variation in the brain, which naturally shows all sorts of variations from one person to another. Neurodiversity emphasizes this spectrum of brain function in all humans and suggests that to better understand the perspectives of those around us, we should try to not only see the world through their eyes, but understand it through their brains.
This is an awesome video, really.
Thank you.
So, yes, you said that before we close the session, there are some quick comments about your presentation. You said that there is no decoding in predictable books.
There are, say that again, please.
There is no decoding in predictable books.
There could be decoding in them, but they're really not meant for decoding. They're not based on any scope or sequence.
So there is no structured reading, you mean?
No, they are
Okay.
predictable books are really just about it rhymes so well, or the pictures are so clear that it's easy for kids to
So
memorize.
they make students lazy. They don't like make so much effort to interpret the text and to decode it.
Exactly, and it also makes parents and teachers think that the kids can read when they're really
Yes.
not reading. They've just memorized it.
Okay. So do you have any closing comments or final words before we close the session?
No,
we will program another session with you on this topic, really.
Oh, thank you. I'll put some more resources into your Facebook page. And I'm happy to answer questions going on. I will put my email address.
Yes, sure.
Into the Facebook page. And I have a Facebook page of my own called Decoding Dyslexia New York City.
Yes, you can you share it here or send it to me to share it on the page?
Sure. Let me see if I can find it quickly. There you go.
This one, decoding dyslexia. Okay.
All right.
Yes, so I will share this the comment section.
Well, thank you very much.
So thank you so much for this really great session, and keep doing amazing things, especially in this area of dyslexia. And it's really a pleasure to connect with you and to learn so much from you.
It was all my pleasure as well. Thank you for all your interest and take
So
care.
thank you and see you later. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.